Try speaking for me, please.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Perfect. Please proceed.
Okay, thank you. The rationale put forward for increasing funding to the police services is to maintain and not expand police services, framing this as an issue of inflationary pressures on wages and the greater complexity of policing. However, inflation and complexity impacts every sector of municipal services. So the debate today is about how we respond to these pressures through budget prioritization. I'm here to express my opposition to prioritizing police services above other city services. I support all of those who have spoken before me to the recommendations of the Just Recovery report as a starting point for what we prioritize as a city. In addition, I offer the following based only on my recent experiences and observations. As the Just Recovery Coalition noted in their recommendations, increasing transit use requires better maintenance of the sidewalks that connects people to transit. While I'm glad that the city is now responsible for clearing snow on some priority streets, I am currently working from home, struggling to manage both the care of my child and my work responsibilities, because last week, our 2-year-old daughter slipped on ice on a city-maintained sidewalk and broke her leg. It is frustrating, to say the least, to see drivers continually prioritize as streets are properly cleared and salted, and pedestrians and sidewalks remain a low priority. If the goal of this city is to make this a safer place, proper sidewalk maintenance will get us a lot further than increasing the funding to police. During the election, many members of this committee and the mayor committed to relying on citizens' committees for advice on a variety of issues, including things like the budget. If this is to be the path forward, staff support for these committees needs to be expanded so that they can have the influence that one might expect they have, based on the restrictions being placed on our freedom of speech as volunteers to these committees. The Code of Conduct to Citizens Committees holds members to a very high standard. And yet the city provides very little to no training to support those members in trying to understand the convoluted and slow procedures they must use to share advice with staff and city council generally. In my view, these committees are actually a waste of resources until they are properly supported by more staff. And finally, like many before me, and I'm sure that will follow me, I want to speak to the issue of affordable housing and the encampment evictions. The recent court ruling about encampment evictions in Kitchener is further evidence that the path we have gone down in the city is not only inhumane, but unconstitutional. As so many have said and highlighted, and it was highlighted in the Just Recovery report, we need an approach to housing that treats housing as a basic human right. This would mean that we prioritize affordable housing and proper financial and social support to those who need it, instead of criminalizing what I think we all know we would do in similar circumstances facing similar constraints. Of course, the lack of affordable housing cannot be done simply by the city, but we can demonstrate to other levels of government our commitment to addressing these problems by prioritizing it in our budget. Instead of funding the police services who have simply helped the city continually displace people with no proper or stable housing. To frame the increase to police services as simply an issue of rising costs and inflation is disingenuous, and it is an attempt to depoliticize what is ultimately a political decision, a decision about priorities. I echo all of those who have spoken before me and their call to stop funding something that's simply not working for our community. I hope this committee takes seriously the mandate they received in the fall to do things differently, to be accountable to all of their constituents, and to refuse the request from police services for more funding.
Thank you, Jessica, for your presentation. We are sorry to hear about your daughter breaking her leg. I can advise you that last year's council did direct staff to provide appropriate training for the Code of Conduct and procedural bylaws to our advisory committee. So hopefully that occurs this year after the selection process. Are there any questions? Thank you. Councillor Kretsch, please.
Hi, Jessica. Thanks so much for delegating. Good to see you. You touched on so many issues I could ask questions about. But I'll focus on one that I think maybe could be beneficial to hear a bit more about in this context. You said something which I think maybe initially people think was counterintuitive for you to say as a member of an advisory committee, that these advisory committees may be a waste of resources until they're better resourced, until they have better support. Could you unpack that a little bit? It's something I don't hear a ton, and it's not. Anyways, go ahead, please. Thanks.
Thank you, Jessica.
Sure. I actually am not clear on what I can and can't say about my experiences on the citizens committees, based on advice I've gotten previously from the integrity commissioner. I guess what I would say is, the process is very slow, and the way that advice we're required to give advice to staff and to the committees that we report to means that a lot of the time our advice is not timely. So I sit on the cycling committee, and obviously there has been talk about investing more into cycling and expanding the rate at which we expand the network. Often when we're presented with infrastructure projects or ask for feedback, by time we are able to figure out what our feedback is, the process is too late. So it's already gone out to tender, and that really constrains our ability of what advice we can give on that infrastructure project or the expansion of that section of the cycling network. I would say it took me, and I have a PhD in political science, a long time to understand exactly how we were supposed to be giving advice, what were the procedural rules. And I recognize that the direction has been to give more training. But it's not just one training session. What I would say is necessary is really staff, not departmental staff, but clerk staff that are dedicated to supporting those committees, and that's all they do. So that when I have a question about how I should proceed procedurally, that I know who I can ask in clerk's office, rather than what happens now, which is that I ask the city staff, then who go on to ask people in the clerk's office, which is just a really slow way to get advice.
Thank you. Councillor, follow up.
Thank you so much. That was clear. I just want to make sure I heard you right. What you're saying sometimes is that committees are trying to move nimbly and quickly, as communities do when they're trying to respond to things, when they're trying to provide advice. And the bureaucracy here sometimes, isn't moving at the same pace, so things are out of sync.
Jessica, can you confirm that?
I think it's out of sync, and also we're volunteers, so we might not be doing things in the most efficient way because we don't understand exactly what the procedure is supposed to be, and that slows things down as well. Councillor?
Thanks. Those are my questions. Good seeing you.
Thank you, Jessica, and we do appreciate all of the work of our volunteers on our advisory committees. Any further questions for our guest? Seeing none, thank you, Jessica. Have a lovely evening. Item 6.24, Sid Ryan.